My name is Ben Gobert. I'm sitting here with Tiffany Curtis, and we are brokers here at Olympic Sotheby's International Realty.
Tiffany and Ben, thanks for sitting down with us today. So question, what are some flags when going to buy a home? Some red flags.
I was going to say, what color flags we're
Hold on.
talking about?
Green,
Yeah.
yellow, white.
What are some flags?
The checker flag. What we need to do to get to the finish line.
Okay. Okay, that was my brain's not awake yet. It's fine. All right, Tiffany and Ben, what are some red flags that people should be considering when going to purchase a home?
There are so many red flags that you should probably consider not buying a home. I'm kidding.
But there's so many green ones as
Yes.
well, so it's great.
Yes. There are a lot of things to consider. Most importantly, knowing that everything can be fixed. A lot of those different fixes will have different costs associated with them. So just understanding what you're getting into in your home, I think, is extremely important at the end of the day. But yeah, happy to discuss some of those.
Yeah, I think there's like a couple different categories for red flags. There's like property condition, neighborhood. Does the home have an HOA? Stuff with title. You know lots about property conditions.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest things that we're looking for when we go check out houses are signs of water damage. We live in a beautiful green state that is wet a lot of the time and can cause quite a bit of damage to houses. One of those would be, I think, anything to do with a leaking roof inside the home. It can cause rot, mold inside of the attic, or mold inside of the home as well. Water damage on the exterior of the home, rotten siding, if the flashing is done incorrectly, or if the paint isn't done correctly on the house as well. And also one that's overlooked oftentimes, I think, would be diverting the rainwater away from the house. Sometimes it can cause foundation issues if it's settling because of the way the water's traveling, or you end up with a lot of water in your crawl space, which is something you want to avoid. Yeah, I think water is definitely one of the larger concerns, just based on where we live. If we were in Arizona, it'd probably be lower on the list, but given that we're in Washington, I definitely think it's one of the key things to look out for.
Yeah. I think a good tip too, because a lot of those things like we can't see behind the walls, why you hire a good inspector. But a good tip for the roof is if you see that granular loss, that could be a sign that you might have some stuff coming or happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, holes inside the roof, or the classic is when you drive through a neighborhood and see big old blue tarps on top of it.
That's a good sign.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I mean, roof replacements are a common thing that happen as a result of home inspections. So, I mean, if a roof needs to be replaced, I think if a seller's really, intending to sell a house, a lot of times, if you're going to buy a house and going through the inspection process, you can get things like that taken care of.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's also the disclaimer with the red flags is, like Ben said, most of these things can be fixed. So don't be afraid of issue. Every home's going to have stuff that comes up on inspections. It can all be resolved if you have two willing parties.
And Tiffany, you mentioned HOAs earlier.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. HOAs are great at a lot of things. Something that's really important to look at are go through some of their last meeting minutes, because they might be talking about replacing certain things in the community park, or maybe they want to build a basketball court, or like condo associations. They may be talking about beginning to charge a special assessment. Well, if you buy a home before they charge that, you all of a sudden have this surprise of, oh, now I'm paying an extra whatever amount of dollars for this new roofing project over all the condos or whatnot. So check into that, look at the budget, see how much money there is in reserves, and you can make a determination from there.
Also leads into one of the points that I was going to make are neighbors. I think you could have an amazing home in an amazing neighborhood that you love, but if you have neighbors, it could make living there a complete nightmare. So I think this is often one that's like really overlooked. We will get the house inspected, make sure that everything's well and taken care of. But going and knocking on the neighbors' doors, especially if you're living in close proximity to them, I think would definitely be a good idea. I have helped people sell their homes where one of the number one reasons why they're selling is the neighbors that they're living next to. And while you can't control when your neighbors sell their houses and who moves into those, you can control what house you're going to buy based on what neighbors are already there, for
Yeah.
sure.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Ben? Like when you say neighbors, is it how they're maintaining their property? Is it how they're not maintaining their property? Is it like nosiness? Do you mind elaborating on that a little
Yeah,
bit?
I think everything that you mentioned. I mean, I think property condition could be one. I mean, if you have someone that's already maybe is a person who's a hobbyist and they love fixing up broken down cars, and there's 12 of them in the yard next door, assuming that those 12 are gonna be reduced to zero by the end of the year is probably not a very likely scenario. I think nosy ones. I mean, particularly, I had a case where there's people always peeking over the fence, and getting in the business of some of my neighbors, and they felt like their sense of security was being threatened by them. To the, I mean, maybe don't want to talk about this in that video, but to the point where they were like carrying around guns on their property. But yeah, so noisiness. Also, there are times where the neighbors don't get along to the point where they like intentionally will play music, you know, pointed at the neighbor's house as a way of kind of messing with the homeowners of that property. Your home is supposed to be a place where you feel, comfortable, at peace. It's going to be your own sanctuary. And if a neighbor is threatening that peace or that sense of, sanctuary where you're living, it's going to make you not want to live inside of that home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you could also, like, during the rush hour of the day, you could drive your car into the neighborhood and just park somewhere, like, considerately, and roll your windows down and just listen.
Yeah.
Like, listen and watch the surrounding homes. What's the activity there? Are there, are there a bunch of kids riding their bikes around the street? Do you like that? Is that what you're looking for? Is it not? Is it quiet? Is it friendly? You can observe some of those things
Yeah.
just from sitting in your car.
Totally. And the opposite can be true. I mean, you can have wonderful neighbors that makes the place where you live so much better. I've have a wonderful neighbor that likes to bring over their garden bounty every single year. Our dogs will run around together, and we always wave and smile to each other, and it makes me feel like I've got a real sense of community, and I like my neighborhood a lot because of that.
Aw.
The opposite can be
Aw.
wonderful as well.
Cute. Hey, Ben's neighbor. Here's a red flag. Title.
Yes.
So the title report. You can ask your agent about this, but you should be able to see a preliminary title report before you make an offer on the home. And this will list out any easements that affect the property, or are there any unpaid taxes, or disputes over ownership or liens. That's a good indication of, like, hey, are we going to have to go through a process? Again, fixable, but you'd have to go through a process to get those things figured out. Gives you somewhat of an idea of what's been happening on this property. How is it affected? Are there people driving over part of the land to get to their house behind? So kind of look at those things. Those are good indicators.
And in layman's terms, how would you describe an easement and a lien?
It would be, so a lien could be like, maybe they got their roof replaced and they didn't pay the roofing company. So the roofing company said, well, we're going to put a lien on your home, and when you sell it, you have to pay us back. Easement, layman's terms, would be maybe you own, or maybe this property is acreage and there's another property behind. They have a granted right of way over your property. There's different legalities with that, so you want to talk to the title company about that, but they can drive over your property to get to theirs.
Okay. And if
What would you add to that?
I was just gonna say, if it was your, that neighbor that had, all the broken down cars, and he had an easement to maybe fix some of his cars in your backyard, that would not be a fun situation to have.
Yeah.
No, I think
Unless you also like working on cars.
No, I think you're right on it with the easements and the liens for sure. Those are things. Again, going back to your home being your own sanctuary, all of a sudden there's someone driving or cruising through your backyard. You're like, hey, what the hell are they doing back here?
Yeah, didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Can things like that be negotiated in the sale? Like, say that is a scenario that the current owner of the house who's selling, like they have a neighbor who has access to their property and can drive through it. Could the new buyer negotiate a change there? Or is that just the situation and you kind of buy it as it is? How does that work?
It depends on what the recorded easement is. So you'd have to see that attached document to the title report.
So I mean, for in case the liens is on Tiffany's example of the roof, I mean, as long as that roof was paid for by the sellers at closing, then that lien wouldn't be taken on by the new buyer. But for things like the right of way that she mentioned earlier, unless the person who has that right of way, the neighbor, is willing to take that, off of title and no longer have that easement, then it will be transferred with on the title of the property. So probably unlikely that that neighbor would give up their right for free in that situation, or at all. There's a lot of different issues with homes depending on the years that they were built. There's been a vast improvement of the way that homes have been built over the years. We're talking about like electrical systems. There used to be, sometimes we'll see existing knob and tube electrical. There's also an era of aluminum wiring within houses, electrical panels that are currently fire hazards that should absolutely be replaced inside of homes. And these are all things that an inspector should be able to find inside of a house. And again, can be corrected. Some of them are easier than others. Replacing an electrical panel is a lot easier and less invasive than having to tear off the drywall or stucco on the inside of a home to replace all the knob and tube electrical wiring. Plumbing, well, if a cast iron's in good condition, great. If it's starting to rust through or be corroded, it's something to keep an eye on. I think the same thing goes for galvanized plumbing. And both of those types of plumbing are not used in modern homes anymore at all. Foundations, there was a time where poured foundations weren't common or weren't being used, just post and beam. So you'll walk inside of a house where it's 18 inches higher on one corner than it is on the other from settling issues. So I think knowing the age, while you can have an old home that's been taken care of and updated, I think making sure your electrical, plumbing, and foundation systems are in good order.
And they're good things to be aware of. It can sound overwhelming, but pick a good agent, pick a good inspector, and that knowledge base is going to come from that as well.
Yeah,
But this gives you a little bit of education to kind of look out for some things on your own.
totally. Tiffany, what do you think are red flags on a seller disclosure?
Red flags on a seller disclosure when there's nothing on there. Um, the seller disclosure is your form from the seller that lists all these things that the seller knows about the property. So, have there been any previous roof leaks? What's the age of the home? It's a good indication as to what you might have already seen. So if you're walking through the home and you see, hey, in this corner there's some water spots and it looks like there's a leak there, well, you might want to check the seller's disclosure. Has the roof previously leaked? I think it says in the past 5 years.
Yeah.
So, okay, if there's nothing on there, could be a new leak, or it could be something that you want to have your inspector look into because there's an indication that something has happened. And so the buyer's due diligence is really important because you can operate off of that seller's disclosure, but your opportunity to have your own inspection and find out what's in front of you today at the home is, I think, the most important part for sure.
I like to think of another red flag as flipped homes. We've all seen the homes that have gray floors, big white trim, quartz countertops, white paint on the inside. I think every fourth home you see online looks exactly the same on the inside. Um, a lot of times, those contractors are doing it for the sole purpose of making money, right? Which is fine, to increase their profit as much as possible. But sometimes major problems can be overlooked in that situation, as opposed to taking more attention to detail and fixing larger issues with the home.
So you feel like that particular type of home is just done quickly?
Yes, done quickly, and I think there's a lot of them that have been done great. I think there's also a lot of them where maybe the work is done a little bit sloppier. They've got an incentive to use, to get it done as fast as they can, to use the cheapest materials as possible in order to make the highest profit as possible. And sometimes that's not really aligning with a homeowner's interest in buying a property that's going to be well suited for them and not lead to more issues over time.
So how can you, as a home buyer, tell if that's the home you're standing in or not, other than the color palette that you
Yes, an
feel is
inspector.
there?
I mean, the answer to so many of these questions is hire a good inspector.
Yeah,
Hire a good inspector. I think they're absolutely worth their weight in gold, and making sure you're hiring the right inspector as well.
for sure.
Yeah.
On the note of flips, what about any work that's been done in the home that maybe was DIY? Do you guys see those as potential red flags
Yes.
if it wasn't done by a contractor?
Yes. Those
Can you
can
talk
lead
about that a
to
little bit?
issues with appraisal. So when you have your appraisal done, the appraiser comes and determines value, right? Market value, and they could call things out. So maybe you don't have a handrail in the stairway because there was a remodel. There are a lot of issues that I think can come up as of that because if you're a homeowner, you don't know all of the codes, all the
Mhm.
current codes. You may not know the correct way to acclimate your hardwood flooring before you install it. So now there's gaps um, where that may not come on appraisal, but it will affect you as a homeowner over time. Those things can severely affect you.
What about if, like, on the flip, if I am a homeowner and I want to do a DIY, what should I consider before doing those projects if I have the intention of selling my home maybe in the next few years?
Permits would be one of them. I
Please, please,
think
permits.
permits, and there's a certain amount of things that homeowners are allowed to do without permits. There's also certain updates that absolutely require permits and the right professional to take care of that, like doing certain types of electrical and plumbing work inside of a house. And again, a lot of times if I see, I think we sometimes call it a homeowner special or handyman special of work being done on the side of the house that's not up to code or not done correctly, it always begs the question of what else is done inside this house that I can't see right now that
Yeah.
was done with the same level of work inside the home. So, not to say there is more, but you sort of,
A lot of it comes down to the inspector
yes.
again, which is what you see may be some wonky stairs or mismatched materials. Um, Maybe there's like a very odd looking addition to the electrical panel. What else has been done? You may not fully know because either there aren't questions for it on the seller's disclosure, or we just can't see behind the walls or underneath into the plumbing and the electrical. So an inspector is going to be able to look at those things. But it is a good signal of, oh, what's happening here? What has gone on? What has all been modified or changed?
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say pests. Seeing any signs of rat droppings or other kinds of droppings inside the house can definitely be a huge concern. We had a case where we did an inspection on a house that revealed that there was a colony of bats living inside of one of the roofs. We thought the droppings on the ground were from rats, but they were coming from the ceiling from the bats that were living inside of the attic. Other pests that you can see sometimes, but not all the time, on a visual inspection would be uh, like termites or sometimes powder post beetles eating their way through some wood on the outside of the house. More of a concern on the structural members inside of the home, where you wouldn't be able to see that without an inspector. So that's really important. But yeah, I mean, pests can be a huge issue.
Where would you say is the most common area for those droppings to be found?
In the crawl space where you can't see.
Yes.
Um,
Would you get into the crawl space to look?
I would not.
Talked about pests. What about people who have previously had pets? Maybe there are some odors in the home. That's not necessarily something that would come up on an inspection, right? That would make it like be a knock on the home. But do you guys see that as a red flag? And if so, is it a red flag that's worth walking away for the home for?
It is a red flag. I can speak from experience on this. Um, why it's a red flag. What you smell is an observation of what is there. So, what's it coming from? Is it from a pet? If that's the case, where is it? Is there carpet? Did it soak underneath the carpet and now there's mold growing in your subfloor? Uh, do you have pets? Because sometimes pets are territorial, and then maybe your pet's going to tear up your flooring to get to the scent.
Mhm.
So it is worth a sniff investigation of where is this, how big is the problem, and how can I fix it? Fixable.
Yeah. I think when it comes to pets, I mean, you might have to be removing some flooring and using a product on the subfloor to be able to make sure that that is sealed. Some odors that are more difficult, smoke. I mean, cigarette smoke inside of houses can be really difficult to take care of. I mean, you can paint, redo the floors, but I mean, sometimes it will get inside of, I mean, your cabinets, and depending on what other materials inside of the house, you might have to like redo a lot of things inside the home,
Mm.
or replace them in order to get that cigarette smell out of the house. Yeah, and the inspector can't find any of that, right? So how,
No,
in retrospect, how would you have been able to find any of that out?
you learn from someone who's been there to
Yeah,
say, "Hey, check it out."
yeah,
If the smell is if the smell is strong enough, that's an indication that there could be other things underlying.
yeah.
Should you go in and rip up all your carpet? I mean, maybe because there could be black mold in there. Are we supposed to be like encouraging people to buy homes? Bring it around.
How important it is to have a good inspector inside the
Yeah.
house.
I feel like foundation would be a really big red flag.
Yeah, issues with the foundation are a huge red flag. I think because of the cost associated with fixing them a lot of the time. Those repairs could be over $100,000 to fix a foundation on a house. And sometimes the foundation needs to be completely redone on a home. I think red flags, if you're going through the home and you see large cracks or, large, especially horizontal cracks inside of the foundation of the home that has big signs of settling. I mean, those are things that could continue to worsen over time. And, worst case scenario is the house falls in on itself or collapses, right? Which is a huge issue. I'd argue one of the most important ones on the home. So I think making sure that there aren't those red flags in the foundation is a pretty important part.
Yeah, so if you see cracks when you're walking through the home, maybe make a note of it.
Yeah,
And then those are specific questions that you're going to ask during the inspection
yeah,
process and say, hey, inspector, does this look structural to you? Because houses have cracks and
yeah.
they're just settlement cracks. So
Hmm.
not when you see that, it's not, oh my gosh, run. It could just be a settlement crack.
Yeah.
Some of those are normal, but there are ways to determine whether those are maybe caused from the foundation or they're just due to the house hanging out for a bit.
The inspector, if it's bad enough, the inspector will recommend having a structural engineer come out to take a look at it. And if they do recommend that, I think that's something the buyer should seriously consider um, if they're going to be purchasing that home.
Cool. That's a good lead in too. Okay, so most of these things, these red flags that you guys are discussing, will come up on an inspection. So, and they're fixable, right? They should all be
Yeah.
fixable. Are there any red flags that would come up on an inspection that could deter you as agents from suggesting to move forward with the purchase of the home?
No, because really that's up to a buyer. A buyer may be completely comfortable with tackling any issue. They may have some know-how on how to, if they need to fix some carpet, they may know how to do that. Um, we also have a lot of vendors that we've worked with that are trustworthy and do a great job that we can recommend. So we're a resource book for who has good reputation in this area, who does a good job, who's quick, who uses the right materials. While most of those things are fixable, there are some things we talked about that may not be fixable, like an easement.
Mm.
If they're again, you have to talk to your title person because they'll be able to tell you more about that. But um, any of these, the roof, fixable. I got a new roof on the house I just bought,
Yeah.
fixable. Leaks, fixable. Siding rot, fixable. Most of these things are fixable. So you just have your eyes open, look for all the things that might point towards other issues, hire a good inspector.
And I also, to add on to that, I think it's important to know that during the buyer process, right, you get these things inspected, figure out issues with the home. And then afterwards, we can go out and hire professionals to get estimates for all these things and figure out, between the estimates and quotes, how much these things are going to cost to get taken care of and fixed. And then asking to see what the seller is willing to fix. And whatever they're not willing to fix, going back to the buyer and then letting them make that decision if they feel like it's worth it moving forward to take on those expenses themselves after closing on the home. I
In
mean,
most cases,
yes,
there's good negotiation happening.
yes.
What about green flags?
Green
Oh
flags.
man,
You feel good when you enter the home. You
yeah.
enter the home and you, oh, I love this. And careful what you say because there may be doorbell cameras, there may be careful what you say inside the home, but that first feeling you get when you open the door, that's a green flag. You can afford it. That's a green flag.
One thing I like to talk to or mention to buyers is you can tell when you walk inside of a home if it's been a well loved, well cared for home or something that has been treated the opposite of that or was clearly a rental previously. There's a certain feeling that goes along with both of those. So I think you know a green flag for me would just be a well maintained, well loved home.
And I'm sure red flags probably like will vary from buyer to buyer, right? So for one buyer, something may not be as scary of an quote unquote issue to another buyer, such as I don't know, I'm thinking like maybe location wise, like a corner lot house would not be as ideal for someone for one family than it would be for another. But
That's kind of like just your preferences. So maybe if your preference is even something we were talking about a lot more serious issues, but maybe it's something as simple as you have a very specific style of what you want in your new home. Um, okay, wall colors, paint, that's an easy fix. But what if you just have set in your mind that you want a certain color cabinet and it doesn't have that in countertops? Consider the cost to replace those. So that may be a preferential red flag. Maybe you want peace and quiet, or maybe you want more activity in your neighborhood. That's going to determine where in that neighborhood should you be looking. Do you want to be at the entrance where everyone's going to be driving through and walking to get to the park? Or do you want to be in a cul de sac or further into the neighborhood where there aren't as many through streets? That's those are preferential red
Yeah.
flags. And so only a buyer can determine what those are. But we as agents can help guide you towards, and we ask a series of questions. What are you looking for in a home? Where would you like to be? What kind of lifestyle do you like to have? And so those questions can help guide you into what to look for when you're
Yeah.
looking for properties as well.
To add to that too, I think a lot of times those preferences are made during the home buying process sometimes. Sometimes you don't know exactly what you want until you start going out and looking for these houses. And then you're like, you know what? I would like this if it was over on this side of the neighborhood, or the sun sets on this side. We don't get the afternoon sun. I'd prefer it if we were on the other side of the street to be able to get that. So I think a lot of times figuring out those preferences happen over the process of buying the home. I'm sure you have an idea of what you like beforehand, but I think it's cemented and secured in um, while viewing the home. So
Yeah.
don't feel too intimidated if you don't know exactly what you want in the very beginning.
Yeah, that's really good. So we've talked about a lot of red flags in the home buying process, and some of those things can seem scary because there's the unknown of what's going to be in the house that I want. Well, we don't know. And a house of any age, of any style, with any seller is going to have something come up on the inspection report. The the most important thing to know is that most of these things can be resolved. They can be fixed, they can be negotiated within the home buying process. Maybe the seller offers to fix those things. Maybe it's negotiated. Maybe you get a credit and you can fix them how you want to fix them once you close on the home. There's always a way to, with these issues, to get to the end and still have a home you feel safe and comfortable and confident in.
Yeah, and as your agents, it's our job to make sure that these issues are found, expenses for these issues are discovered, and then we can negotiate these repairs moving forward. And anything the seller is unwilling to take care of and fix, the buyers has complete transparency on what they're purchasing and how much it's going to cost to take care of all of these issues.
Knowledge is power.
knowledge is power. At
Yeah.
the end of the day, red flags should not scare you or deter you looking
No.
for a home.
And the worst case scenario is it's not the right house for you, and you could end up walking away from it. Figuring out what these red flags are, how much it's going to cost to fix them, and what the seller is willing to take on are all an important process of home buying.
For sure. Well said.